Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to another discussion powered by Arvato Financial Solutions. On our last panel, we discussed the impact that COVID-19 is having on e-commerce and the rise in online fraud, with the key takeaway being that even with the advancements of artificial intelligence, there are still many high-risk orders left to be dealt with in-house. Today, we brought in the CEO of Fraud.net to speak about the current state of e-commerce fraud, artificial intelligence's impact on fraud prevention and its ability to help refine your manual review process, and what you can expect from fraud over the rest of the year as we continue to overcome the COVID-19 pandemic. My name is Brian Edgman, and I'll be leading this discussion today. So let's start off by introducing our panel. First off, we have Jan, the Director of Strategic Partnerships with Arvato Financial Solutions. Jan?
Yes, hi, and welcome to this panel. Maybe I introduce myself a little bit. So, like you said, my name is Jan. I'm with Arvato now for almost 12 years. And what we do here within Arvato Financial Solutions is that we are monetizing our merchants' business models. And what I mean by that is that we give them a comprehensive end-to-end solution from risk and fraud management services, where we, for example, work with partners, to payments, where pay after delivery is something that is really of important to our company, accounts receivable management, dispute management, order reviews, and at the end also international debt collection. That's basically what we do for our merchants every day.
Perfect. And also with us, we have Whitney, the CEO and co-founder of Fraud.net.
Hi, good to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me. Fraud.net's about a 4-year-old company, and really we serve as the data orchestration layer and fraud prevention platform for about 175 enterprises around the world. Really the objective is to speed real customers through the whole purchasing process in as efficient and frictionless a way as possible. So we've been both, we've worked with Arvato now for several years, both as a client and as a partner, and yeah, we're thrilled to be here and to talk about our joint offerings.
Great, that sounds wonderful, and I appreciate both you guys hanging out with me for a while. So I guess from the start, let's start with a nice easy question for you, Jan. With the closing and reopening of brick and mortar and the spikes to several e-commerce categories, what have you been seeing with online fraud over the past few months?
Well, first of all, maybe before I answer regarding fraud, maybe I'll tell you what we have seen in general in the past few months. So, because it has changed quite a bit. So at first we saw a dramatic decrease in transaction count, especially in the verticals that we mainly cater to. So fashion, sometimes even luxury goods, which were basically not sought after. So we saw a dramatic shift in the verticals towards hygiene and online groceries, and less in fashion retail, for instance. But that has changed now quite a bit. So April, for instance, was humongous. So the US April order volume is up 54% in comparison to last year. And also when it comes to revenues, it's 37% higher. And one dramatic shift we've also seen in Germany, UK, and France, where 80% of the consumers make at least half of their purchases now online. So there we will for sure see a high increase in chargebacks, especially in this period with such high purchases. And we have anyway seen throughout the time an increase in friendly fraud. So where people are saying that they didn't order these goods, yet they actually did order them. So and that is, we believe, also a theme that we will see in the next months to remain, as unemployment is rising and people would still like to consume online goods.
All right, great. Thanks for that. Whitney, same question to you. What have you been seeing over the past few months?
Yeah, so it's very similar to what Jan was saying. However, in terms of just absolute fraud attempts, we've seen April over February, as an example, about 40% increases in fraud just across the board, across all, we track several hundred types of fraud methodologies, and across industries, across attack methods. We've seen roughly a 40% increase, and we see that actually sustaining for quite some time. It's not dropping off, and in part it's consistent over previous crises. As a rule of thumb, Every time there's a 1% drop in GDP, gross domestic product, we see about a 10% increase in fraud. So this is pretty consistent with what we've seen in the past. And it's especially in this work from home environment, it's very important to be vigilant.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm hearing that we are seeing an increase in transactions as well as an increase in fraud. So because of this, I mean, you mentioned friendly fraud already, Jan. What types or other types of fraud would you suggest that merchants be aware of due to these spikes, something to keep your eye on or to take notice in your own shop?
Yeah, when it comes to the in the shop, when I'm running my own shop, then you really need to see how you can tackle friendly fraud and how you can also deal with a new situation. So you have a lot of new first-time buyers, which typically run into order review more quickly. So if a first-time buyer is buying something of really high value and maybe something else isn't totally matching up, then that's what's happening. So as there is already so much volume, it is difficult then to deal with so much volume in fraud review queues, for instance. So that is just a general observation, a general thing to think of how do you cope with that. I mean, are you going to tighten your rules, for instance? But does that make sense? Do you not upset genuine buyers that come for the first time to your shop? So I think that is a major theme to consider in general. What we see in addition, and that wouldn't be a recommendation when I'm running my own shop, but when I'm actually just simply a consumer, we see a rise of fake shops across the board. So that consumers should be aware of that's what's going on and that they're not losing out on their money. That would be my take on this question.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and I would. Sorry.
No, perfect. Keep going, please.
So on the friendly fraud side, yeah, it's a fascinating type of fraud. It has primarily been historically a U.S. problem for a number of reasons, but now it's kind of becoming a more globalized issue. We see on the luxury goods and the physical commerce anywhere between 20 and 40% friendly fraud rates. I mean, as a percentage of the total fraud that enterprise is experiencing. And then on top of that, with digital merchants, with just digital media downloads and gaming and such, sometimes we'll see as much as 80% of all their fraud being taking the form of friendly fraud. So it's a huge problem, extremely costly, and a little bit more difficult to separate, identify, and resolve. So that's also a very big and fast-growing segment right now.
Okay, Whitney, I want to actually keep it with you now, but keying on something that Jan said, you're seeing a lot of first-time buyers due to the situation come in to different web shops. And we've been hearing a lot of cases regarding less digitally savvy consumers utilizing online channels more with the traditional retail remaining closed or limited as we're slowly reopening now. How do you recommend that companies can overcome the difficulties in scoring these new first-time buyers with not a lot of digital footprint behind them?
So in general, the first-time buyers are first-time buyers for that particular enterprise. They do, however, leave a digital fingerprint, having purchased at a number of other places, and therefore, one of our core value propositions is that we're a consortium of digital transactions. So in all likelihood, we've seen that person purchase previously at other enterprises, and also we've seen the outcomes and seen how those behaviors ultimately create risk. So largely the only way, there are two elements really to a friendly fraud solution. One is tapping into as large of a consortium as possible, which is our role. And then second, when there are questions as to whether it's a good or a bad customer, then to be able to kick it out to the enterprise to allow them to manually review the suspicious but not, crystal clear good or bad transactions. And that's really where our partnership thrives.
Jan, same question to you.
Yeah, I would just simply like to elaborate on something that Whitney has said. So that is actually the key value that comes from a partner that has consortium data. So, because I mean, for the single enterprise, I mean, for them, it is a first time buyer and they will not be able to do, much else than review these orders. But, that's basically where really the beauty of data, shows, and it shows in this crisis. So I just simply wanted to support that point that Whitney has just raised.
Okay, very, very good. So going along, also what you said, Whitney, question directed towards you is you're talking about companies, with a partnership are doing okay. Being able to tap into additional data is a great way to do it. But there's a lot of companies out there who don't have, the proper channels lined up, who don't have those data pools and, are beginning to tweak their AI to remove as much of the manual process as possible. Is this something that you often come across? And if so, what do you recommend? What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, about a third of our employees are data scientists, and so we look at this all day, every day. Data science today doesn't provide, it's certainly not a silver bullet, and so what it's very good at is taking, historical patterns and data and helping to significantly refine who might be put into a manual review queue, who should be auto-accepted, auto-rejected. All that is great. However, there are always going to be some subset, no matter how good the data, how much the AI performs, there's always going to be a set of transactions that an individual company, based on their risk profiles, is going to need to review. It's possible if you're small that you could automate everything, but in reality, these large enterprises need to feel like they have some control. So to date, it's not something that AI has solved.
And then just following up with something you mentioned, for the larger companies, what problems can they fall into if they start manipulating their AI too much?
Well, I mean, sometimes the companies that have relied too much on AI because they really did think it was a silver bullet, there's an opportunity cost that that exists. So that's you can actually lose decent customers that maybe should have fallen off on, that maybe got caught up in a manual review or in a rejection process.
Okay, cool. And then Jan, similar question. As companies begin to adjust their AI, how does manual order reviews come into play?
Yeah, and that's where the problem comes in, right? So we have talked earlier about the large spikes in volumes, and they weren't planned for. So it's not like we are seeing now a holiday season where everybody knew it was coming up. But now, especially as stores were closed, certain brands pushed everything online, and that there are sales out there every single day cause additional spikes in volumes that are coming in. So if you keep everything constant, you would anyway have then a really high number of orders that are going to a review. And if you do not want to make them wait longer to clear these queues, you really have a problem when it comes to just simply the labor that is there. So there, it might make really sense to look at service providers that can maybe just simply help you. I'm not even saying that everybody should outsource everything and ideally everything to us at Arvato, but to look at a service provider that can help you in this time and pick up some of the extra work that needs to be done. So I think that would be a good recommendation. Because the other opportunity that's out there is just simply to tighten the rules, to make sure that not as much is going to order review, but then you're really upsetting genuine customers. And especially since we just said, many of those may be first time buyers and you're already upsetting them the first time around. This person is probably not going to ever come back. So I think it is important to not upset your customers and make sure to just simply handle the volumes and like I said, maybe with the help of an external party.
So one of the things you alluded to a few times here is the large spikes in volume and going back to friendly fraud. I want to circle back to one of the first questions, basically just regarding chargebacks. I guess what have you seen regarding chargebacks in the last few months? Are you seeing a higher percentage in line with the transactions that are growing, or what are you seeing with that?
Yeah, so we see an increase for sure. So it's higher than the percentage increase that we have anyway, taking, for example, April 2020 compared to April 2019. So it's an even bigger problem. And there, I mean, as there is so much friendly fraud out there, and sometimes you can't prove it, therefore, I mean, it's really important to defend your chargebacks. And also there, you have yet again a problem when it comes to coping with that work, because defending chargebacks is typically a very manual process that hardly any company, any merchant has automated or anything. So therefore, they're fighting to work on these chargebacks in order to not have them expire, because that is the other issue. These chargeback requests, they expire quite quickly. And even though you may be able to defend a larger chunk of those, you are simply losing them because they're expiring. So yet again, a problem when it comes to resource allocation, and obviously yet again something to consider to work at least for a while with an external party.
And I would just elaborate a little bit more on that and sort of underscore the importance in that these first-time buyers, when they commit friendly fraud, in our 4 years of tracking tens of millions of active fraudsters, we find that if a person commits friendly fraud once, they're likely to commit it 9 or more times subsequently. So once they get a taste of it, it's trouble for the merchants. Secondly, for every chargeback, since that's the traditional measure of friendly fraud, I think as much as 80% of chargebacks incorporate an element of fraud, which is terrible in and of itself. But for every one chargeback, we actually see 2 or more fraudulent credit requests. So a customer may call up and say, I didn't receive my goods. The goods were actually delivered, but they'll say, I demand a refund, otherwise I'll charge back. And then the company, the merchant will capitulate, give back the money in a credit and avoid chargeback altogether. Those are simply accounted for as customer credits when in fact it's fraud.
Those are some, excuse me. Sorry, I want to follow up real fast with Whitney, and then I'll come back to you. The numbers that you just mentioned are frightening. If you are a merchant and you're seeing transactions like this, you're seeing this data, what would be your recommendations for them?
Well, if it's pretty clear that an individual over their past purchasing at other merchants, if they have 12 purchases and 8 of them are chargebacks and 3 refunds, then in all likelihood there's something that is amiss. So combining again the consortium plus the manual review process is the only way that we see being able to contain friendly fraud.
All right, great. And then, sorry, Jan, what were you going to say?
Well, I was just trying to allude to the fact that Whitney has talked about. So not just do one or do friendly chargebacks yield additional chargebacks committed by the same person. You also do have much higher losses than it appears like. So if there's an order that is being charged back, then for every dollar, the merchant is almost losing $3 in total. So due to additional fines from the schemes, due to work that has to be done when it comes to defending these chargebacks, and the programs that merchants are being put into. So it's a real pandemic in itself, actually, and therefore it's really important to get it under control before the whole avalanche is approaching and you are stuck inside of it.
Well, I guess I want to follow up with the same question to you then. So if you're a merchant and you're seeing these things, what would your recommendations be, and what should they be handling it?
Well, my main recommendation is to really not let chargebacks slide. So you must defend them, and you must do so rigorously, because if you don't, then eventually, if you're large enough, then eventually your behavior will lead to additional declines that banks will just simply conduct as they see a transaction from you as a merchant, and they already know it's going to be, or it may be fraud anyway, and they will also decline your good transactions. So therefore, it is really important not to let friendly fraud go through. To not defend it is something that you really shouldn't be doing. And that is what we are seeing at the moment, that, or many merchants that we're talking to, they are saying that they cannot cope with the volumes and are rather focusing on different pieces than defending each and every single chargeback that is worthwhile defending. But I recommend to definitely do so.
So I guess just the final question here as we wrap up. I guess I'll stick with you, Jan. We've kind of been discussing how the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted fraud to date, where we are today. However, how do you foresee the near future and, let's just say to the end of the year, how do you foresee that playing out?
Well, that is a really good question. And if I had the right answer, then that answer would make me rich, I assume. So it really depends, I guess. It depends also per region. So obviously our main footprint or our biggest footprint is here across Europe. There, it will be interesting to see anyway what's going on because, due to PSD2, we will have 3D Secure being mandated. So therefore, you would assume that at least credit card fraud will be somewhat under control, and it should really have an impact at least. So here in Germany, for instance, we are already seeing a shift towards fraud that's being committed by pay after delivery options, for instance, and and that has actually nothing to do even with COVID-19. It's just going to it's an accelerated process here. So, and whatever is happening in the States, I would not foresee that it's really going to change in any shape or form in the next few months. So I would still think that friendly fraud will be with us for quite a while. And that also when it comes to regulation and maybe 3D Secure being mandated in even other territories, that fraudsters will always find a way to still defraud, maybe by using different payment methods, as I said, across Europe, but maybe also to see how to get around a 3D Secure barrier. So so overall, I would say interesting times, and I don't think it's going to change all that much.
Understood. All right. So Whitney, I will give you the last words. Same question. How do you foresee the remainder of the year playing out?
So I would agree that it's not going to change that much, but it's actually going to remain constant. In our view, it's going to constantly continue to increase a bit. Fraud thrives on chaos, and these are certainly chaotic times where not only are the fraudsters, committing and testing out new approaches, but the fact that all of, personnel have been sent home, a lot of the controls and existing systems that kept fraud at bay have been shaken up a little bit. So we actually see it continuing to get worse a little bit. Fraudsters are very smart, especially on the organized side. They're very smart, very capable, extremely well capitalized. They are adapting to this new environment as quickly or faster possibly than the individual enterprises. And so, we see new forms popping up literally almost every day.
Yeah, that's great insight into it. Well, cool. Thank you guys so much for sticking around and answering these questions. I greatly appreciate your time.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, have a great night, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.